In the village of Njobi, when the rain slept too long and the ground cracked like a broken calabash, people spoke carefully, as if their words could summon bad luck. That was the year it happened, the year of silence and whispers, when a girl walked out of the forest barefoot and nameless. She arrived just as the sun was bleeding into the earth, that sacred hour between light and dark. Her skin was too smooth for someone who'd lived through the drought, unburnt by sun, unbitten by the greedy flies that feasted on the rest of them. Her eyes were too bright, like the moon had kissed her lids before she opened them. And her clothes, simple, but too clean, like they had never touched the mud of any real place. The first to see her was old Mosi, the blind drummer. Though his eyes were milked over with age, his hearing was still sharp as a hawk's. He heard her footsteps before anyone else. "That is not the step of someone who carries sorrow," he murmured from his mat. "That is the walk of something untouched." The villagers gathered, wary but curious. She said nothing, not a word, not even a nod. She simply looked at them, as if she had been here before and forgotten them all. A woman, Ma Bibi, stepped forward and offered the girl a wrap for the cold. The girl did not reach for it. Instead, she tilted her head, sniffed the air like a jackal and blinked slow, deliberate. That was when little Tunji screamed. The boy had been standing closest to the girl, and his face twisted like he had seen a ghost gnawing on its own limbs. He fled into the bush and refused to return to the compound for 3 days. When he did, he wouldn't speak of what he saw. He just repeated the same line over and over. "She doesn't have a smell. She doesn't belong here." But the village had suffered too much to question a strange kindness. The girl, quiet as she was, helped. She carried water from the well, though her clothes never stained. She pounded yam with the young wives, but the pestle never made her hands raw. The goats didn't run from her, and the dogs didn't bark. The priest tried to question her lineage, but even his Ifa beads gave no answer. The gods remained silent, and so they gave her a name, Adejua, meaning she came with peace. And maybe in the beginning, that's what she brought. Crops began to grow again. The clouds returned. The sickness that had hung like a vulture over the village drifted away. But peace is a tricky thing in African soil. It often walks with its shadow. One by one, people began to change. Ma Bibi, the first to offer kindness, was the first to die. She was found on her compound floor, eyes wide, mouth full of dirt, like she had tried to swallow the earth to escape something worse. Then came Bako the hunter. He followed Adejua into the woods one evening, thinking no one saw. He never returned. His bow was found snapped in two beside the stream. No blood, no footprints, only a piece of black cloth, wet but untouched by mud. The elders gathered and whispered behind kola nuts and bitter leaf. They sent for the diviner, a man who had not stepped into Njobi for 5 years, since declaring the gods angry with them. He came reluctantly, wrapped in red and white, beads clinking like tiny bones. He asked for nothing but silence as he laid out his cowries. 3 times he cast. 3 times he frowned. "The spirits do not recognize her," he said finally, voice dry like firewood. "She is not of the land. She is not of any land." "Then what is she?" one elder asked. He looked toward the center of the village, where Adejua sat beneath a baobab tree, eyes fixed on the horizon. "A reminder," he said, "that even the forest forgets what it hides." Still no one moved her. Fear is a heavy thing. It sits on the chest and makes brave men cowards. So they let her stay, even as children began to vanish, even as dreams turned rotten with the scent of decay. One night, Akin, a young man known for chasing spirits with laughter, decided to ask her directly. He approached her under the same baobab, torch in hand, his voice firm. "Who are you really?" Adejua did not flinch. She looked at him, and for the first time she smiled. It was not warm. It was not human. It stretched too far. And something inside Akin's mind bent. He fell to his knees, shaking. He cried without sound. The next morning he could not speak. He could only draw symbols in the dust, shapes no one understood, but which made the goats panic and the chickens go still. After that, the village stopped asking. Instead they fed her, left bowls of yam and bushmeat at her door. They avoided eye contact. They began to speak her name with the reverence reserved for masquerades and gods of rivers. Adejua became a fixture, like the well or the tree. She existed without origin, without past. Then one day an old woman came from a neighboring village. Her name was Nanasua, a traveler and herbalist known for speaking to birds and dreaming in tongues. She stood outside Adejua's hut for a long time before knocking. The villagers watched from a distance, silent as mice near a snake. Adejua opened the door. The two women looked at each other. Nanasua's eyes narrowed. "You've worn that face before," she said. Adejua smiled again. "But not here," the old woman added. "Not for many years. What do you want this time?" Adejua said nothing, but her hand moved slowly to her chest, where no heartbeat could be heard. "You will not take this village," Nanasua said. "I remember what you did to my people. You came as a boy last time. You came smiling then too." Adejua stepped aside. They say Nanasua entered. They say she never came out. The door remained shut for 3 days. On the 4th morning, the hut was empty, both women gone. But in the clearing, where no grass had grown for months, the earth had split. A fresh grave, marked with bones arranged in the shape of an eye. The villagers did not dig. They did not ask. They simply rebuilt the hut, left it empty, and told their children not to speak of Adejua. Not ever. Not again. But sometimes, when the wind is wrong and the baobab leaves rustle in patterns too precise to be natural, they hear laughter. Soft, familiar. The kind that sneaks into your ears and settles behind your eyes. And sometimes strangers come, travelers, passing through. And sometimes they ask about the silent house in the center of the village. And the villagers always say the same thing. No one lives there. No one ever did. Because in Njobi, they learned that some truths are better buried, even if they don't stay dead. But secrets do not stay buried forever in the soil of Africa. Even the ancestors whisper restlessly when the wrong spirits walk the earth. Years passed. Children grew. And those who had once seen Adejua became elders themselves. They spoke less, laughed softer. They taught their children that some knowledge is a curse and silence can be a blessing. Stories of Adejua were not told by firelight. They were stored in eyes and gestures, in the way an old woman might flinch at a full moon, or how a boy would be slapped for whistling after dark. The hut remained untouched. Until one rainy season, long after the last known elder, who remembered Adejua, had been buried with kola nuts and carved stones, a new family moved into Njobi. The husband was a trader from the southern coast. His wife was a nurse trained in the city. They brought with them books, a radio, and ideas of change. They were not from Njobi, and they did not understand. They were given a compound near the edge of the village, but when the nurse saw the empty hut near the center, the one so clean, so perfectly kept yet abandoned, she asked to live there. The chief said no. The villagers murmured, but she insisted. "This is nonsense," she said, brushing off warnings with modern logic. Superstition. So they moved in. The first week was peaceful. Birds nested in the mango trees, the sun shone, and laughter returned to the compound. The wife swept every morning. The husband played music on the radio, unaware that the rhythms disturbed the spirits lying under the soil. On the 7th night the baby cried. She was not their child. They had adopted her from an orphanage months before. A small, quiet girl who barely spoke but always smiled when birds flew overhead. That night, her cries were not those of hunger or pain. They were deep, echoing, primal. Not the cry of a child, but the wail of something older wearing a child's voice. The nurse rushed in to find the girl standing, at the edge of the mat facing the corner. "There's someone under the floor," she said. They searched. There was nothing. The next day the baby would not eat. She only stared at the walls and whispered, she's listening. They called for a doctor. He came, examined her, found no illness. Stress, he said. New environment. That night the baby vanished. There was no sound. No forced doors. No open windows. Just the baby's blanket folded neatly at the foot of the bed. And the scent of firewood, though no fire had been lit. The mother went mad first. She would not sleep, would not eat. She began speaking to the corners of the house, arguing in languages not her own. One morning, she walked into the village square naked, singing a lullaby that none of the villagers had ever heard, but which made the goats scream and run. The husband tried to take her away, to leave Njobi. The car would not start. No matter how far they walked, they always returned to the center, to the hut, to a Dejua's silence. Finally they begged for help. The new chief, young, educated, skeptical, tried to reason with the old ways. But one woman, one very old woman, came forward. Her name was Ifan, and though her memory was cracked like clay in drought, her eyes were sharp. She stood at the edge of the crowd and said, "She is awake again." They laughed at her. Until that night, when the well turned black. No water. Just darkness, rising like oil. And when the dogs howled, not barked, howled. Every villager remembered the stories their grandparents were too afraid to tell. Ifan went to the sacred grove. She left before dawn, carrying 7 white stones and a bowl of palm oil. She returned at dusk, shaking, her hands scratched by unseen claws. "She has returned," she said. But not as herself. They gathered in the square. They lit fires. The flames danced high and wild, as if afraid of what might come from the shadows. And then the girl returned. The baby now walking. She entered the square without sound, barefoot, her eyes glassy, unblinking. She held a small object wrapped in cloth. She handed it to Ifan. It was a braid of hair. Jet black. Still wet. Ifan fell to her knees. "It's her," she whispered. She never left. The villagers turned as one to look at the hut. The door stood open. Smoke curled from within. Not from fire but from breath. Like the hut itself was exhaling after a long sleep. And then they heard it. Drums. But no one was drumming. They beat slow. Rhythmic. The sound of footsteps returning. The girl smiled. Then spoke in a voice far too deep. "You buried me. But not all of me." Then she collapsed. They burned the hut that night. Flames clawed the sky. Screams poured out of the fire. Not human, not animal. The sound of memories being torn apart. But the next morning, the ashes were cold. Too cold. And in the center of the ruin, untouched by flame, sat the bowl of palm oil Ifan had taken into the grove. Inside it floated a single tooth. No one claimed it. No one ever spoke of it. The couple left broken and hollow-eyed. The child never spoke again, and would sometimes, in moments of moonlight, begin to hum that same eerie lullaby. The village rebuilt. Again. And the earth was quiet. Again. But silence in Njobi is never peace. The elders speak now, in hushed voices, of a legend they once buried. That long ago, before the white man's ships ever came, before iron was king, there was a spirit that roamed the lands. Erodi, the forgotten one. She could take any face. Man, woman, child. Her goal was never war. Only remembrance. She fed not on blood but on attention. Worship. Fear. She was forgotten once, sealed by old tongues and older gods. But someone had opened the way. And she had returned. Not as a Dejua. Not as the girl. But as the idea that something once buried can grow again. Now, each year, on the day the girl first appeared, the villagers leave offerings near the ashes. Just in case. Just in fear. A bowl of yam. A carved mask. A silent prayer. Because if she returns again they know better. They will not ask her name. They will not meet her eyes. They will simply bow. And bury the truth. Again. Time moved, as it always does, but it did not heal Njobi. The villagers no longer celebrated the moon festival. They stopped playing the talking drums at night. Even the children, those born after the flames devoured Adejua's hut, walked past the ashes with quick steps and bowed heads. The wind that passed through that spot felt wrong, always a bit colder, always carrying whispers in languages no one remembered learning. Still, some insisted on forgetting. A new teacher arrived from the city, bright-eyed, idealistic, assigned by the government to bring light into the dark corners of rural Nigeria. Her name was Miss Olamide, and she was not afraid. She had grown up in Lagos, surrounded by noise and streetlights, and believed most village tales were the inventions of old minds unwilling to change. When she heard about Adejua, spoken only in half words and sideways glances, she laughed. Every village has a ghost story, she said to her class. But we are not afraid of shadows, are we? The children were silent. One girl, Simi, raised her hand. She visits me in my dreams, she said. She wears my face and says I am hers. Miss Olamide paused. That's just a bad dream, she said. We all have them. Simi frowned. She knows when you lie. That night, Miss Olamide stayed late at the school. She was marking homework when she heard footsteps. Small, bare. She assumed it was a child who had forgotten something, but when she opened the door, no one was there. Except for a small object on the ground. A clay doll, its head split, its eyes burned into black holes. The next day Simi was gone. Her bed untouched. Her sandals left outside the door. No footprints. No trail. Only a circle of salt on the floor. And a single word scratched into the mud wall. Remember. The villagers wanted to search, but no one dared step into the old grove where the sacred trees wept sap as dark as blood. Even the old woman, now hunched and half-mad, only muttered one thing over and over. She's gathering herself. Piece by piece. Face by face. Miss Olamide left without saying goodbye. She did not pack her things. She was seen walking toward the main road at dawn barefoot, humming an old lullaby no one had taught her. Her eyes were open too wide. Her mouth was smiling, but her teeth chattered like she was freezing. No one ever heard from her again. And yet the village endured. They always do. Years passed. Joby changed. A small clinic was built. A solar light was added to the square. But no one, not even the boldest of the youth, ever dared build where the ashes of Adejua's hut once lay. Until the government came. They arrived with machines, men in helmets, and maps that ignored old borders and older warnings. They declared that the empty land in the heart of the village was perfect for a communications tower. The chief protested. The elders pleaded. But laws written in distant places don't recognize ghost soil. The construction began. The workers were not from Joby. They laughed at the stories. They worked late into the night. On the 7th day, they broke ground in the center of the ash-marked land. The first blow of the shovel struck something that clinked, not like stone, but like bone. Still they dug. By morning the earth had changed. The air was heavy with heat, though the sun was hidden. Birds fell from the trees. The well bubbled like something alive was pushing up from beneath. The village priest, who had long since lost faith in the old gods, stood at the edge of the site and began to weep. We broke the seal, he whispered. We have no name for what comes next. And then the fog came. Thick. Yellowish. It rolled in from the ground, not the sky. It crept over the compound, down the paths, under doors. People screamed, but not from pain, from memory. The fog brought voices. The voices brought visions. Each person saw something different. Mayuzo saw her mother long buried, pointing at her with hollow eyes and a mouth full of sand. Young Daimeji saw himself drowning in red water, while hundreds of versions of himself laughed from the riverbank. The chief saw Adejua, standing at the edge of the fire, holding a child's hand and whispering, "You promised never to forget." By the time the fog cleared, 12 people were dead, not from wounds, but from forgetting how to breathe. The workers were gone. Only their clothes remained, folded, placed in a perfect circle around the broken ground. That night the diviner returned. No one had summoned him. He stood where the first shovel had struck and shook his head. Not even the gods want this place anymore, he said. You broke the silence. You remembered too late. Then he opened his bag and poured white sand in a spiral, muttering words older than the village itself. He burned leaves that screamed instead of crackled. He spit into the earth and said, "If you hunger, feed on me." And the ground swallowed him. Just like that. The spiral of white sand turned black. The trees bent toward it. And a voice, not loud, not soft, but final, whispered through every ear in Joby. Memory is sacrifice. Since then, the village has followed a new tradition. Every year, on the day the construction began, they choose one thing to forget. A name. A song. A piece of history. It is burned, buried, erased. They do this not to honor the past, but to starve it. To give Erodi nothing to cling to, no echo to follow. Children are taught to look forward, never back. Elders whisper riddles instead of truths. The shrine is gone, replaced by a mound of salt that never melts. And yet, on still nights, a figure can sometimes be seen standing at the edge of the grove. Sometimes a girl, sometimes a boy, sometimes a shadow that wears no face at all. If you ask who it is, the villagers will not answer, because they know now more than ever. No one dares ask where she came from. They just bury the truth. Again, and again, and again.